What's good in the hood, YouTube? This is Crazy Samurai 71 here, bringing you another video. Today I'm bringing you a video on Kamen Rider Build episode 17. So we are back to now reviewing Kamen Rider Build. As many people know, with the New Year, they decided to not release a new episode on New Year's Eve. So, first episode of the year for Kamen Rider Build, and it was a good one. It was not one that had necessarily a lot of best matches, but it introduced a new mode, it introduced a couple of new characters, and it was big on story, and again, not many best matches because it was heavy on story and less on fighting, but the fighting was still really, really, critical for this episode, so it kind of worked out in a way where it made sense. The episode, to start with, is called Rider Wars Start, and I want to talk about it because it was definitely really cool. The way it basically starts is we end up seeing that the Hokuto government is attacking the Totoo government, and they're attacking all the people. The civilians in different areas of Totoo are being evacuated, people are dying, people are getting injured, there's just constant war and brutality going on, and it's just a vicious cycle of constant combat where things just don't look necessarily great. So what also happens is that we end up seeing the Hokuto leader, the female government leader, who she's trying to cause all these problems and trying to get the Pandora's box so that she can unlock the powers and everything. All this is going on, and she's even trying to kind of work where she's not necessarily trying to create an alliance with the Saito government, but she's trying to kind of keep them so that they're not involved in it and make it so that they're not going to create problems for the war. The question, though, is that when will Saito join in, or will they join in? The guess is that they might, but we don't know yet. So all this does happen. Obviously, that's a big question. When will that happen, and will they have their own rider? We don't know yet, but it could happen. So what does happen, though, following this is, everyone that's in the cafe is watching on the news, seeing all the different chaos and problems that are going on, and eventually at one point what happens is that the Totoo soldiers that are part of the government troop, not the Guardians, but the ones that are the actual people, come into the cafe and make Sento and Ryoga go with them to the Totoo government institution where Gentaku is located. So they end up going there. They're told by him that, actually they're told on the news beforehand that the Kamen Riders will be used as military weapons to provide a defense against the Hokuto attacks, and so that's when they're brought over. So at that point, when they're brought over, they're told that they will be used as weapons. They have to fight out in the war. Sento's not really interested. Ryoga is, because of one big point, which is that they will be, if they do this, they will be rewarded. The thing that will help them is that they will be exempt of any false doings in crimes or anything else. So in other words, they'll have a clean slate. And that's something that really interests Ryoga, of course, because, in his current state, he can't go anywhere. So in a lot of ways, this is sort of his opportunity to clear himself of all problems he's had by doing this. At the same time, Sento doesn't feel like it's his fault and he needs to be in this war. This is not him. This is the government's creating their own problems for each other. But it's still pretty brutal. So what does happen, though, is that they eventually do agree to it. It's not an initial thing, but they realize that it might make sense, and also because of the fact that there are some Totoo troops that come in and basically stop them in their tracks, basically saying, you have no choice in the matter, you have to do it. So at that point, they're basically put up to it. They end up getting these GPS bracelets that are put on them so that way Gentaku can communicate with them and also find them via a GPS signal from the bracelets. So that's pretty important, that they create all this technology specifically for the reasons of making sure that they don't screw up and they don't disappear or anything else happens or they decide to abandon the mission. They have to be involved in it. There's no choice in the matter at this point. So all that does happen. Eventually, what does occur is they end up going back to the base, and I believe this is right. I could be actually, no, that's not right. What does happen is that following this, they eventually get attacked at one point in the woods by these three figures. These three figures are from the Hokuto trio. The trio was introduced in the previous episode for like the last couple of seconds of the episode, and they were these three guys. We only got to see one of them in that episode actually transform, but we got in this episode was confirmation as to something that's really important about them. They actually keep their senses when they become smash monsters, meaning that they don't forget anything, they don't go berserk, they keep their mindsets. Now, do they have hazard modes? Of course they will. But as far as things go with as far as things go otherwise, they do have a standard mode and a hazard mode. It's already been confirmed that is the thing. The three of them consist of the Castle Hard Smash. Hard Smash is the variant. That's how they're able to keep their senses, because they're hard smashes, meaning that they can grab a bottle that they have and use it to become a smash monster and then revert back to a human being. So they can keep all their senses, they can fight, and they are the weapon of Hokuto. They are the big weapon. There's one other weapon, which we'll get to later on, but they are the initial big weapon that's creating a lot of problems. So the Castle Hard Smash is the leader. That's Akaba. Then there's the Stag Hard Smash. Stag is referring to like Stag Beetle Hard Smash, which is Aoba. And then the third one is the Owl Hard Smash, which is Kiba. So those are the three Hokuto members. So that all happens. They fight them. Sento initially uses the rabbit tank mode pretty much the whole time. So does Ryoga. Just uses Crossy like he typically does. All this occurs. They get beaten up pretty badly, and they have to eventually retreat. So they retreat back to the base. In the base, they're bandaged up, and they end up finding, when they're going through things, a box that actually has the splash driver that Sento made. He is not happy that he made it because he knew that his previous self knew that it would be used as a military weapon, and that's why he left it incomplete intentionally, because he knew that it would be something that all the nations would want to use for military purposes. Now, one other thing I forgot to mention is that this episode also confirms how many panels there are and how many bottles are used per panel for the Pandora's box in order to unlock its full potential. The number of bottles, I forgot to mention this, was 60 bottles. Now that doesn't necessarily mean that it's including any of the special movie ones, like ones that are based on the different riders. If you've seen those in stores or whatever, or if you've heard of them, they're like certain combinations that are meant to replicate certain riders, like O's and W, and a number of other riders have are being represented through bottles in this show. So I don't think that those count, but the main ones that are used, I'm pretty sure those count. And again, what they also find is that each nation has 2 panels for the Pandora's box, and each panel has 10 bottles that they can fit, meaning that they can have 5 best matches per panel, 5 best matches per panel times 6 panels equals 30 best matches that potentially exist in the end, which is interesting. So keep that in mind. That's what we're looking at in the end, potentially. And again, we've only had 5 or 6 best matches so far seen, so it's not like we're maybe a little bit more than that, but something along those lines. So in other words, there's still a bunch more that could potentially happen. So anyway, what does happen from here, after they discuss the slash driver, which they decided to put away, they end up trying to figure out other things. At one point, Sawa appears, basically telling that Mizora went out and she's alone and unguarded, and so at that point they end up going after her, trying to figure out what's going on with her. So at that point we end up seeing Sento running around the place, and we also see Mizora, who is watching over all the people, seeing them crying in tears, upset, and she just looks on. And at that point, the two of them, Sento and Ryoga, are running after and looking for Mizora. They can't find her. At one point, what happens is that Ryoga ends up spotting this guy who is on top of this building, kind of laid back, and that is actually our new rider that we saw him in the last episode, kind of like the last couple of seconds, and then this time we actually got to see his human form, and the next episode he'll actually be like in it, like he'll be involved in the episode. So keep that in mind, that this episode kind of was like getting him introduced as his human form. Now they don't say his name yet. It is Kasumi Takiwa, which you'll see him soon enough. If you saw my previous episode, you probably saw the image that I showed with Grease, so that is cool. So anyway, what does happen is that he ends up seeing this guy who's talking about like this festival that's going on and how everyone's injured and everything. And at one point, what happens is that this guy ends up seeing this smash monster that comes around trying to attack the people in the area. He doesn't transform, but what he does, Kazumi, is he ends up going at it, punching it once, and knocking it out. Think about that for a second here. He punched it once, meaning that he was able to defeat it in one punch, as opposed to what they typically have to do, which is they have to transform, they have to do a whole bunch of different things in order to even knock it out. This one was destroyed instantly, which could mean that it was just weak, but it actually looked like a hazard mode one, which gives you a sense that like that's not weak. So that's pretty amazing, honestly, if that is the case. So that does happen. Eventually, following his leave, we end up hearing this conversation with Gentaku and Ryoga, where Gentaku tells Ryoga that he hasn't been able to contact Sento, and he says that you should use that new driver that you got in the base, and for some reason he knows of it, the Splash driver, and he says and the thing is that we have this memory that Gentaku has of when he said that Ryoga should be able to access its power. It should be no problem for him. And so at that point he says, like, Ryoga says, like, I'm not gonna take orders from you, but I will do it because I probably have to. And so basically at that point he ends up running back to the base. In the meantime, Sento ends up going to find Mizora. He ends up spotting her looking out towards Totoro. She is upset because she knows that she's the one that created it all because of her ability with her bracelet and everything else. She feels bad because she purified as well. She thought that she was creating justice, when in reality she was creating means for military forces and weapons that could destroy an entire country. So in other words, she feels like she's ruined these people's lives. She's done something so terrible, and in a lot of ways she kind of has, but it wasn't her intention to do it. She thought that she was doing the right thing. So all this does happen. It's an unfortunate state of things. She ends up crying and she's really upset. Eventually Sento ends up giving her a hug and basically comforting her and basically telling her it's not your fault. She basically says it's my fault, because he realizes that it really is his fault. You know, his past self did this. He was the one that decided to initiate this whole entire project, to create all these smash monsters and to create the nebula gas and use all this other stuff to create all these bottles or whatever. And if he hadn't done all that, this wouldn't have happened. None of this would have happened. Everything would have been perfectly fine. There wouldn't have been this war. So again, it's really interesting to see where that went. What does end up happening following this is eventually the Hokuto trio appears. All three of them end up transforming. Sento ends up realizing that he really shouldn't be blaming that it's his fault, and he needs to stand up, and because of her, she made him aware that he needs to be just as much involved as everyone else. So at that point he transforms into Rabbit Tank Sparkly. He tries to fight the three hard smashes. Doesn't really work very well. Eventually, Ryoga appears. He actually transforms using the Slash Driver, which when he uses the Slash Driver, he actually gets to use the Dragon Jelly. The jellies are the devices that they use for the Slash Driver rather than the bottles. Though you can use bottles. That is a thing. You are able to use bottles for the Slash Driver. The bottles actually have a very different effect, but this episode didn't really show that off. It did show off that you can actually put the the Dragon Changer device that Ryoga uses in the build driver to access a new effect in attacks. So that's cool. Anyway, following all this, they Ryoga ends up fighting using this new mode. At first it responds by like electrocuting him and making him feel pain, but then eventually he loves it. He ends up being really powerful, and this battle just gets really intense. At one point they end up doing a finishing attack between Rabbit Sparkling and Crossy Charge, which is this new mode that he has, and when he does when they do the two of them, what ends up happening is that they end up knocking the 3 hard smashes away, which leads to them actually getting, I think, 4 or 5 new bottles, and so then Sento and Ryoga gets these bottles from Hokuto's trio. At that point, we end up seeing a new character. This is the new character that we saw before, Kazumi Takawa, I believe it is. And it's pretty interesting, to say the least, because he comes in and he says, like, why would you leave me, Kazumi Sawatari. So what happens is that he ends up saying, like, you don't think that you'd leave me out. And so then at that point he comes in to the scene and they say, Captain, and suddenly they realize that, and something that basically confirms is that Kazumi is actually in charge of the Hokuto trio. I don't know what kind of connection they really have otherwise, but it's interesting. And it looks like he's about to transform, because what happens is that we end up seeing him pull out the Slash Driver. Now, the episode basically ends with him actually having it, and he's going to use it, but we don't actually get to see anything happen with it. So the preview for the next episode looks pretty good. What we do end up seeing in the preview is that there will be 2 new best matches that will be used by Sento. Those 2 new best matches, which is really cool that we're actually getting 2 next episode, is Smart Wolf and Phoenix Robo. Phoenix Robo actually has been released already in stores as far as like merchandise goes. Smart Wolf has not, so most likely that will be released probably next week, I would imagine, because usually they tend to release products fairly close to when they're introducing the show, if not a week after, sometimes before. It really depends. Phoenix Robo was introduced, I think, like 2 weeks ago. They started putting it into stores. Now it's been out there for a little while, so people are definitely getting it. So yeah, so that's all happening. Next episode should also finally be the first episode where we actually get to see Grease fight and see his whole transformation sequence for Grease, which is cool. And I'd love to know your guys' opinions. Did you guys enjoy this episode? What do you guys think about everything that occurred in this episode? Again, this was the episode that probably had the least amount of best matches so far, probably, which is funny because like the past 2 episodes have had like the most. So it's sort of been like, okay, we've had like a lot, now we're having none, and then like the next episode we'll see what happens. So I love to know your guys' opinions. Please remember to like, comment, subscribe. Tell me what you guys think, and I'll see you guys in the next video. So until then, guys, I'm Crazy Samurai 71, and goodbye, guys.